Welcome to Nature Calls, Conversations from the Hudson Valley. Our team's goal is to present science-based information about gardening and all things nature in New York's Hudson Valley. Hosts Jean and Tim, along with team members Teresa and Linda, are master gardener volunteers for New York's Columbia and Greene counties. So if you're interested in gardening or nature, or nuggets of information about what's happening outside your door, settle in. Enjoy the conversation. Whatever the season, we have something to say.
Hello and welcome back to Nature Calls, Conversations in the Hudson Valley. I'm Jean Thomas.
And I'm Annie Scibienski.
This week we're covering food. Asparagus is a seasonal treat this time of year, and Annie has some great ideas for the cooks among us in her sequence of Patch to Plate.
Then Tim and Jean talk about cover-up vines like passion flower and hardy kiwis, both with extraordinary culinary value, by the way. Passion fruit tea can be made from the leaves, and there are desserts made with passion fruit, although you have to buy the fruit. Our season's not long enough. And the hardy kiwi is more of a berry, but it's edible, and I like to forage in my own yard.
The third subject for today is kind of a reverse food. On Hits and Myths, we find out if making deer eat soap will deter them. I need to go to lunch now.
My name's Annie Scibienski. I'm a master gardener volunteer and happy to be part of the Nature Calls podcast team. On today's episode of Patch to Plate, I'm talking about the spring thing we call asparagus. Other early arrivals to our veggie season make me happy. Ramps, fiddlehead ferns, rhubarb, and spinach. These all begin to show up in gardens where we forage, farm stores and stands, and sometimes, though rarely, at a pick-your-own location. I'd like to talk about each of those, but today I just find myself with a lot to say about asparagus. Have you seen it grown? A big field of asparagus looks like something lunar or otherworldly. It's a brown field that looks like somebody ran through and shot a quiver of pencils into the air and they all landed tips up. It's fun to pick asparagus in a field like that. You grab your bucket and you head out, you find some asparagus stalk that looks tasty, just bend down, bend the stalk, and it'll snap off. Where it snaps will leave the tender vegetable in your hand and the woody stalk still on the ground. The thickness of the stalks you see and pick are going to vary, and they're not indicative of either the age or the tenderness. Thickness of asparagus you enjoy is really a personal preference. Us, we like the thin asparagus. That's our preference. But if it's thicker or thick, it's a good idea to peel it with a vegetable peeler. Good varieties to consider if you want to grow your own: Jersey Giant, Jersey King, Jersey Knight. Notice a trend. Viking, KB3, Purple Passion. Check out the attributes of each of these varieties from a link on our Cornell Cooperative Extension page. Like most perennials, it takes a while to establish an asparagus bed, but once you do, it will be productive for years. Asparagus pairs extremely well with butter, cheese, lemon, olive oil, salt and pepper, and eggs. For cheese, particularly Parmesan and Pecorino are favorites, but Feta, Fontina, Goat, Munster, Regatta, Romano all work really, really well. For lemon, both the juice and the zest flavor asparagus nicely. Keep in mind that asparagus likes to keep company with milk and cream and dill, mushrooms, parsley, shallots, and hearty stocks, vegetable or chicken stock, work well. Vinaigrettes and vinegars are a good pairing with asparagus. So with that in mind, let's get cooking. Thin asparagus cooks faster, thicker asparagus takes a little longer. If it's thin, like pencil thin or pinky thin, it'll cook really quickly no matter what method you use. If it's any thicker than my index finger, I tend to peel it. You can blanch it, steam it, you can grill it. If you grill it, I recommend you grill it on a screen so it doesn't fall through the grill slats. You can oven roast it and certainly stir fry it. One of my favorite ways to eat asparagus, and we have eaten it in dozens and dozens of ways, is also the simplest. I get a large cast iron skillet hot. I don't use any oil in the pan, I just get the pan hot. And while it's heating, I snap off the ends of asparagus, spray it with a little olive oil, sprinkle it with salt and pepper, and place it in the hot pan. Once it's in the pan, I turn it, I jiggle it, I keep it moving around until the green darkens and the stalks are lightly brown in a few spots. I remove it from the pan and serve. The whole thing just takes a very, very few minutes. Out of the pan, I squeeze a little lemon on it and enjoy it. It's tender. In fact, if you think back to the flavors that asparagus favors, some quick finishes to keep in mind are, once it comes out of the pan, you can drizzle it with extra virgin olive oil, butter, flavored oil, lemon juice, vinaigrette, hollandaise sauce. You can even grate a little hard-boiled egg on it or some Parmesan cheese. If you want to roast the asparagus, we've included a link to a recipe. But basically, preheat the oven, hot, 425 Fahrenheit, snap off the ends of the asparagus, and place the tender stalks on a foil-lined baking sheet. You can spray them with a little olive oil or cooking oil. Sprinkle them with salt and pepper, some minced garlic, and some grated Parmesan. I use my hands to rub that mix onto the vegetables so that they're evenly coated. And then I roast them for about 8 minutes, depending on the thickness. Again, out of the oven and serve them immediately. Another good way to oven prep your asparagus is, again, hot oven, 425 convection or 450 bake. Snap off the wooded ends, get them in a rimmed baking sheet, sprinkle with olive oil and a little salt, and then pour half a cup or so of chicken stock, or the vegetarian version of that, over the asparagus. Sprinkle on some crumbled feta and toss some halved cherry tomatoes in with the asparagus and pop that in the oven for 5 to 8 minutes until the asparagus is tender and the cheese is just starting to soften and melt. A nice quick salad starts with cutting the asparagus into bite-sized pieces and blanching in salted water. Do it for a minute or two and then transfer the pieces to an ice bath. You always want to do that to stop the cooking from your veggies, transfer them to an ice bath. While it's cooking or cooling, whisk together some oils and vinegars and a little soy sauce. Toss the cooled asparagus in the vinaigrette and sprinkle with sesame seeds just before service, or if you prefer, pass around a bowl of sesame seeds and let people sprinkle at the table. Any of the preparations that we talk about are relatively simple. This is a delicious, very, very seasonal vegetable in our area, and to savor it plainly with the flavors that merely enhance it are the best way to do it justice. I mentioned earlier that asparagus loves eggs and cheese. When I think about that combination, I think most frequently about putting together a quiche or a frittata. But let's talk quiche. We usually make our quiche without a crust, but certainly it's easy to make a crust for a quiche. You can either buy one in the refrigerator case at the store or make a simple pastry crust. Without a crust, we typically like to serve it with a nice piece of toasted sourdough bread. But to get started, preheat your oven to 400 degrees Fahrenheit and spray a pie plate or a quiche pan with cooking spray. Snap the woody ends off your asparagus and cut into 1-inch or thumb-sized pieces. Cuts on the angle are very attractive. Also chop a tablespoon or more of dill. Spray a large frying pan with pan spray or melt a little butter, a teaspoon or two. When the pan and butter/oil are hot, add the asparagus and saute for 2 or 3 minutes. You're not cooking it through, you're merely getting it started to finish cooking in the oven. Add the dill and saute another minute or so until the herbs are wilted. Take the pan off the heat. In a separate large bowl, whisk together half a dozen eggs, a half a cup of dairy. Whatever you have on hand is fine. If you use whole milk, 2% skim, it'll work. The higher the dairy fat content, the creamier the outcome will be. but use what you have on hand and use what your family likes to eat. So you've whisked in the dairy. Add a good pinch of salt, a couple of teaspoons of mustard, and whisk until those items are thoroughly combined. Then fold in the asparagus, a cup of your grated cheese of choice, and pour the mixture into your pan. Bake for 20 minutes-ish. The quiche should be set at that point. Butter knife inserted in the center. May come out shiny wet, but it shouldn't be dripping liquid. It's also fine to pop it back in for a few minutes to brown the surface, because brown food tastes good. This is a great brunch dish. I like to have it ready, sitting on a baking sheet, oven preheated, when my guests arrive. I can greet them, pop the quiche into the oven, pour drinks, get everybody in the kitchen to help assemble a salad, and by the time the quiche is ready, the salad will be done and the conversation's already well underway. You can make a quiche like this more substantial, actually into a meal, by adding diced smoked salmon or lightly sautéed shrimp, or maybe some thinly sliced and sautéed morel mushrooms. Add them to the egg and dairy when you add the asparagus. If I added smoked salmon or shrimp, I'd probably stick with dill as my herb. If I add morels, I think I'd swap out the dill for thyme and its woodier flavor profile to tie the asparagus to the mushrooms. I've included a link to basic crustless quiche in the show notes, but play around, make it your own. I like to make a quiche like this and serve it warm for dinner. Leftovers are good for breakfast and great for a lunchbox lunch. Remember, the season for asparagus is short, very short, so I've included some links to freezing, canning, and pickling the asparagus to help you extend the season. For more on food preservation, listen to episode 6 and check out the CCE food preservation page. For other recipes, please go to the nutrition page on our Cornell website. Enjoy! That's it for this edition of From Patch to Plate. I'm Annie Scibienski.
You're listening to Nature Calls, conversations from the Hudson Valley. Stay tuned for The Cover-Up.
Hi, I'm Tim Kennelty.
And I'm Jean Thomas.
And welcome to another edition of The Cover-Up. Jean, I'm going to talk about a vine today that I thought was exclusively from the tropics and completely exotic. Passiflora, or the passion flower. I've had passion flowers for years as houseplants, and I move them out to my deck in the summer to enjoy their beautiful, highly ornamental blooms. What I didn't realize until recently is that in addition to growing in Mexico and South America, many species of Passiflora are native to the southeastern United States and are hardy from zones 5 to 9. The genus name of Passiflora refers to the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. In the 15th century, Roman Catholic priests named the plant for the Passion of Christ, or suffering and death of Jesus Christ. When we talk about hardier passion flower vines, we're generally referring to Passiflora incarnata, commonly referred to as purple passion flower, wild apricot vine, or maypop. This is a trailing tendrilled vine bearing intricate saucer-shaped purple flowers with prominent styles and stamens. I'm always blown away when mine is in bloom. Passiflora incarnata fruit is roughly the size and shape of a hen's egg. When ripe, it's yellow and crinkly, and yes, it's edible. The term maypop is thought to be derived from the sound the fruit makes when you step on it. The extract from Passiflora fruit is promoted as a dietary supplement for anxiety and sleep issues, as well as for pain and heart rhythm problems. I just think they're beautiful and interesting plants, and now that I know they're hardy in Zone 5, I may try planting one in my garden. As a garden plant, Passiflora incarnata likes well-drained soil, preferably amended with lots of good organic material. It prefers full sun to part shade and is best sited in sheltered locations with a structure to climb on like a trellis or lattice, and regular watering, especially in droughty periods. If you're in Zone 5 like me and you want to grow passion flowers on your deck or as a houseplant, you're not limited to the native species. You can grow Passiflora cerula or blue passion flower, native to South America with white petals and blue stamens, or even the more tropical Passiflora coccinea, or red passion flower. It's a real knockout. You really can't go wrong. All three species are relatively easy to grow, at least as houseplants, and are very fast-growing, interesting-looking vines with amazing flowers. And if you're lucky, you might even get a maypop or two. Jean, what are you going to tell us about today?
The kiwi vine family has several branches. See what I did there, Tim? The kiwi fruit we're all familiar with in the supermarket is out of our reach as a garden plant, since it won't thrive further north than Zone 8. We are in luck, though, because there's a version with equally beautiful foliage that's hardy to Zone 4, sometimes Zone 3. Actinidia is the formal genus name from the Greek actus for ray or spoke of a wheel, describing the growth style of the vine. The fruit are about 1 1/4 inch long and are also often called Chinese gooseberry. The taste is also somewhat tart like the gooseberry. If you're growing for fruit production, the species Arguta might be best. They're dioecious, so both genders must be represented. 1 male to 3 or 4 female plants can be very productive. A variety called Isse, that's Issae, is recommended for its restrained growth habit. If you're satisfied with the beautiful foliage and an occasional fruit for the novelty, there is a species called Colomicta, named for its native region in Northeast Asia, and sometimes called Arctic kiwi. These have a particular variety called Arctic Beauty that has striking white variegation. The more sun it gets, the more vivid the white markings. Remember that if you want fruit, you must also have a male and a female. If you just want the foliage, a male alone will do just fine. Apparently the male of the species is showier, foliage-wise. The vines are robust and woody and require a strong support. Pruning will become a regular chore for mature plants once they've reached the size you want them to be. In ideal conditions, they are capable of reaching a 20-foot length. Both sexes produce small, fragrant flowers that look to me like tiny orchids, but they're hidden among the leaves and are easy to overlook. Decide location carefully. Once established, they don't relocate gracefully. Now that I've described the plant and its care, I'll answer the question that you may or may not have asked. How come they're called kiwi? Isn't that a bird from New Zealand? The answer is historic. The plant was grown in Asia for centuries. It can still be found in the wild. In the early 20th century, New Zealanders discovered it and began to cultivate and change it. The name of Chinese gooseberry wasn't a hit in the market because gooseberries are famously tart. So some ad exec decided to call it kiwi fruit in a nod to the developers of the modern version of the fruit and to the visual similarity of the fruit to the native bird. Both are small, kind of oval, and covered with brown fuzz. To this day, New Zealanders are slightly offended by Americans calling it just kiwi, as the word refers to the bird, as well as being a nickname for a New Zealand native. Everywhere else in the world, apparently, it's called kiwi fruit. One cranky New Zealander complains that we don't call breadfruit bread, so why do we call kiwi fruit kiwi? And that's enough for today's vine discussion.
That's it for this edition of The Cover-Up. Until next time.
You're listening to Nature Calls, conversations from the Hudson Valley. Stay tuned for Hits and Myths.
Hi, this is Devin Russ. I'm a Master Gardener Volunteer with the Cooperative Extension of Columbia and Greene Counties, and I'm here to talk about garden hits and myths. Today I'd like to explore, do soaps like Irish Spring or Lifebuoy work as deer repellents? So many gardeners have trouble with deer damaging their plants. In the summer, deer move through flower gardens, nibbling the phlox or the hostas. In the winter, they can strip foliage from evergreens like yew, or browse all the buds from young fruit trees. It's no surprise that there's a lot of buzz out there about ways to deter the deer. One of the most common recommendations is to hang bars of strong-smelling soap. So, does this work? There are quite a few commercial products that claim to repel deer. They have different methods of deterring deer. Some aim to cause browsing deer some pain, with hot pepper or ammonia, for example, that will make the deer avoid revisiting the area. Some aim to make desirable plants less noticeable by using strong smells to put the deer off. Scented soap, for example. And some hope to work by frightening the deer with something like wolf urine or decomposing meat or eggs, which presumably mimic the smell of a predator's recent kill in the area. Scientists have done a number of studies to compare different forms of repellent. It's very difficult to study this because there are so many things that can change. Imagine, for instance, that 10 different repellents are applied to 10 different plots. If one of those plots is untouched by the deer, is that because the repellent in that plot was so effective? Or is it because that plot was windier or had deeper snow, so the deer preferred more protected spots? If a repellent seems effective when applied to one species in a test plot, will it work on a different species of plant in your garden? What if the test plot was surrounded by other deer browse, but your garden is in a developed area with not much natural food for the deer? One study noted that you can assume that if a repellent deters deer from browsing a plant that deer especially like, it's reasonable to assume that it will also protect less desirable plants. But you can't reverse that. If a repellent deters browsing on evergreen seedlings in a test plot, that doesn't necessarily say much about how well it will protect your hostas or your arbor vitae, which deer love, or how well it will work in a neighborhood where wild brush is scarce. And if it's hard to make predictions from careful experiments, it is so much harder to draw useful information from anecdotes. If someone tells you that they always hang 3 bars of soap in that apple tree and the deer leave the tree alone, well, you just don't know whether deer were even in the area, or whether deer avoid that tree because of local dogs, or because there's something much tastier next door. I found only one scientific study which tested soap as a repellent. Researchers from Colorado State University hung bars of Lifebuoy soap in one test plot and applied various commercial repellents in others. They also had a control plot with no repellent. The soap did have some effect at deterring deer damage. The researchers documented more deer damage to the control plot than to the plot with the soap bars. But the soap was outperformed by many of the commercial products. One researcher even noted that deer have been reported to eat the soap bars. So, while soap may do some good, there's no reason to think it's a magic bullet. The good news is that the high-performing deer repellents in that study and in other studies all had something in common. They contained eggs. This means that many home recipes for deer repellent should also perform well. Lots of garden books and websites offer recipes based on eggs. Some of those recipes also include strong-smelling stuff like garlic or mint. But research from the University of Minnesota suggests that the extra ingredients actually reduce the effectiveness. So a simple home remedy, not as simple as hanging bars of soap, but still simple, is to spray a blend of eggs and water. One thing to remember is that hungry deer will eat almost anything. They will ignore stuff that smells bad or even stuff that tastes bad. If they're starving, they're going to eat. The only way to be sure of protecting plants from hungry deer is to fence the deer out or have a protective cage around a particular plant. With that in mind, it's a good idea to pay attention to whether any repellent is going to be effective enough for your purposes. It can be expensive to buy or make enough repellent and then replace it on schedule. And it can be a lot of work if the repellent requires spraying. It's worth considering whether it might be better to just put all that money and effort into surrounding your most desirable plants with a cage or a fence. But there are good reasons to try using soap bars as a deer repellent. You don't need to spray it, it's relatively cheap and easy to buy, and you don't need to reapply often. And it works, at least a little bit. I wouldn't depend on soap to protect valuable plants. I put fencing around my young trees. But since it is so easy to use, I'm going to try it. I will put a soap bar under a certain hosta in my garden that the deer seem to demolish every year. I'm thinking that if that hosta gets to keep a full set of leaves into the summer, That will be a good demonstration that soap can help deter the deer. Thank you. This is Devin Russ with another episode of Hits or Myths.
That concludes another episode of Nature Calls, Conversations from the Hudson Valley. We would like to thank Sandra Linnell and Devin Connolly from Cornell Cooperative Extension of Columbia and Greene Counties for production support. And a special thank you to our listeners for joining us on this episode of Nature Calls, Conversations from the Hudson Valley. You can find links to any of the topics mentioned in this episode at our website at ccecolumbiagreen.org. Comments and suggestions for future topics may be directed to us at columbiagreenmgb@cornell.edu or on the CCE Master Gardener Volunteers of Columbia and Greene Counties Facebook page. For more information about Cornell Cooperative Extension of Columbia and Greene Counties, visit our website at ccecolumbiagreen.org or visit us in Hudson or in Acre. Cornell Cooperative Extension provides equal programming and employment opportunities